All right. How's everybody doing? So before I start, I want to just you all to give a round of applause to our great servers who are serving us lunch today. As Major Darren mentioned, my name is Theo Ellington. I am the Director of Homeless Initiatives and Community Development for the Salvation Army. And I'm honored to be in year 2, where we are setting to redevelop and repurpose 6 properties here in San Francisco to aid the current homeless crisis. I announced this a little over 2 years ago, but I want to underscore that we have the capacity to add up to 1,700 new beds to the network here in San Francisco. And we cannot do that work alone, and I'm honored to introduce this esteemed panel. And I kind of feel like this is a family reunion because I have, in some capacity, worked alongside each of these individuals who I am about to introduce. First, former Mayor Art Agnos, who brings give him a round of applause. Yes. Who brings second to last seat, who brings a real unique perspective to this discussion today as a former social worker. You can sit wherever you want. Yes. Former social worker, former regional director of HUD. And I met Art Agnos, interesting enough, in a master's program at the University of San Francisco, where he walked in with a foam board advocating to make sure that the development the Warriors Arena was equitable for all communities. Mayor Art Agnos. Our next panelist, Mr. Jason Elliott, serves as senior counsel to Governor Gavin Newsom, running all of the homeless operations out of the governor's office. And as you can see, this gentleman is no nonsense. And I learned that the hard way. Under Mayor Ed Lee, when I organized a protest on the steps of City Hall, I had to walk into Mr. Elliott's office and face everything he had waiting for me. Yes, exactly. We are good. Gail Gilman, who runs, she's Chief Strategy Officer for All Home California. And Gail, I have something for you. This is going down memory lane, OCII, yes. Block 9. So not only does Gail have the lived experience, she has been advocating for over 20 plus years for vulnerable populations. We were down in Mission Bay fighting for a parcel to be affordable housing, and now she is running regional strategy for All Home California. Thank you. And last but not least, Shanell Williams, who is like a big sister. Younger sister. No, she has really been, she's a San Francisco native like myself, first of all, and we carry great pride in being from San Francisco. But she is unafraid to stand up for what she believes in, no matter what the situation is. You might want to Google her to see what I'm talking about. But Shanell is the chair of the Prop C Committee, also known as Our City, Our Home. They're getting ready to dump a bunch of money here in the city and county of San Francisco to aid the homeless crisis. Please give it up for Ms. Shanell Williams. And you all know Major Matt Matson, who I report to. We've been working side by side for 2 years now to get this project off the ground, and he's been a tremendous person to work alongside with. Major Matt Matson.
Thank you so very much for being a part of our panel. I promise this won't hurt too much, okay? We'll get things started off here because time is short. I'd like to address Mayor Agnos. Mayor Agnos has a unique background in social work and later as the Western Regional Director of HUD. And in the past several years, we've seen many approaches to homelessness introduced. We'll ask Major Agnos to speak to the importance of creating housing opportunities at every level while also integrating the much-needed social services. Mayor?
Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Very good. Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here and welcome the opportunity to salute the Salvation Army for its long and distinguished service to our city and indeed around the country and around the world. And also to salute First Republic Bank. Jason and I both have accounts there, don't we? Yeah. And we are pleased that our bankers are so engaged with our community. Of course, that's not new for First Republic. They've been doing it for a long, long time. So we're grateful to them. And to all of you who are here and those who couldn't be here because of whatever circumstances they may be in, thank you for their and your support and generosity. I was mayor a long time ago. And we've come a long, long way since I came into office in 1988, when we were just beginning to recognize that there were a lot of people on the streets of our cities, not only here but all over America, who were having difficulties finding housing. And we began to look at that for the first time with some serious recognition of the problem. Because prior to that, we treated people that we saw on the streets as some kind of a disaster. And it was, and it is, continues to be that. But at that time, we thought that people living on the streets was a temporary problem that we could fix. And we used what I call the American disaster model. We've seen that all over the country, still do, when there is a disaster, whether it's a tornado or an earthquake or anything in between. What do? When people are hurt, we go in, we take them out of the disastrous situation, we open up centers that are in a high school gymnasium or something else like that, where they come in, we set up their we set them up with blankets and beds. The Red Cross comes in with coffee and donuts. And after a couple of weeks, and when the disaster has subsided, they leave, they go back, and they resume their lives with whatever support comes from insurance policies, if it's an earthquake, and a variety. And it's handled with that kind of a model. And that's what we started to do in the late 80s when we saw people on the streets. We took them, we put them into a center where they could get some kind of sustenance, but in 2 weeks, nothing changed because we did not recognize that there were presenting issues that caused the homelessness. So it was not only being without a home, but it was also being without, depending on the person, a job, or it could be their mental health, it could be drug addiction, it could be runaway kids, it could be abused domestic partners, whatever. But that could not be fixed with 2 or 3 weeks in a facility that was designed as a disaster center. And so we began to recognize in 1988, 1989, that we needed to combine housing with the appropriate services depending on the needs of the individual who was on the street. And so we developed the first plan that incorporated the 3 kind of tiers that we still use today as the bones or the fundamentals of our approach to homelessness. The first is obviously an intake, some kind of an intake center where we start to take a look at each individual in order to determine what that person needs to get back on their feet if they're capable of it, in addition to a home. And so once that is done, in my day we called it a multi-service center, where we evaluated people, diagnosed them, and then figured where do we put them. The second tier, of course, is transition housing with services across the board, and clearly the Salvation Army was one of the first. For me, when we started in 1988 with Beyond Shelter, and they created one of the first transition housing, the second tier in the three-tier system we use, which was a place for homeless families and their children. It's called Harbor House, and it's been there ever since I was in office 30 years ago. And then the final tier, hopefully the end result of the previous two, was to get people into independent living in housing like the rest of us live in, or something therein. Well, we've come a long way since then, but unfortunately the problem has gotten worse and worse and worse, so that today, and there are an estimated anywhere 12 to 15,000 people on the streets of our city. And you go to Oakland and they'll tell you the same thing. You go to San Jose and you hear the same thing. Los Angeles is even worse. So despite the fact that we've done extraordinary things with nonprofit partners, the private sector, as well as government, with mayors ever since me giving their undivided attention to it, and I think that Mayor London, as she suggested in her comments, has had a double whammy, because in addition to dealing with the problem of homelessness, which is a serious #1 issue for all of us here in this city, she's had the challenge of dealing with a pandemic that, as she said, is even worse than trying to deal with an earthquake at the same time. And I commend her for doing an extraordinary job with the pandemic and doing a marvelous job with homelessness, even though it is still very prevalent with us today. So how are we going to change this? What's different? What are we going to do? Clearly, what we're hearing about the way out is extremely important and an essential piece of the city's response to this issue. But quite frankly, today, if I were mayor, it's not enough. It's not enough. I think that, and we're lucky that we have an administration in Washington that understands what this issue is all about and is sympathetic and supportive. But even more important, here in California, we've got a governor who has been a mayor in this city, who knows this better than anyone, and has made this an important priority for his administration in Sacramento, because he brings with him the understanding of what a mayor is going through here today. And so with that in mind, I'm going to surprise Jason here with what I call a exceptional intervention. I think that we need to revisit the question of opening the old mental hospitals that we had when Ronald Reagan was governor, and closed, and repurpose them to be therapy centers on a mass scale for the number of people we see who have mental problems in our cities, as well as drug addiction. And if we were to do that, when you talk about the statistics today in our city, just this one, somewhere between 12 and 15,000 people, with the estimates being anywhere from 40 to 50% of them being mentally ill or drug addicted, if we could take them and move them to therapy centers in the old hospitals that have been hopefully renovated and repurposed with support from the cities to operate them, I think that we would then be left with, say, half the population we see today in our cities. And that population is a manageable population, whether they are runaway kids or abused women or unemployed people or a variety of other issues that can be managed, in my opinion, on a local level with the resources that we have in place. However, if we are going to continue to try to deal with a needy, mentally ill population, or a drug-addicted population that is in a halfway house in the Tenderloin who comes down to the street and has a supermarket in front of them, I don't think we're ever going to catch a hold of this. So I am proposing that we begin to explore the idea of a partnership with the state that reopens those facilities, repurposes them for the kind of population that needs their help today, and is supported so that the state doesn't have to pay the whole freight by some of the $1 billion that we're spending now in the city to try to keep up with this problem.
Thank you, Mayor Agnos. Well, Jason, you were kind of put on the spot there a bit, but you know, Mayor Agnos does ask a good question, and he's a very innovative man. I was amazed when I was learning more about some of your ideas. Like, let's bring in a Navy ship. Let's do this thing. You know, it takes stuff like that. And working with Admiral Bidoff.
Admiral Bidoff was my partner.
That's right. That's fantastic stuff. We need out of the box thinking. Jason, would you care to respond to the question?
I thank you for inviting me to this debate with Mayor Agnos today. I have the pleasure to be here. Thank the moderator of the debate. First of all, I appreciate being home. My heart is in San Francisco. We live in Sacramento now, but every time I get that feeling coming across the Bay Bridge, I love being home and I love seeing all of you. So thank you for inviting me back today. The answer to Mayor Agnos' question is we accept the challenge and we've started, is the short answer to the question. You're absolutely right that we need more capacity in this state, physical capacity, beds, clinics, with mental health services right in them. The answer is you're absolutely right about that. The way that we're proposing manifesting that vision, perhaps slightly differently, but as a man who's been in politics and government a long time, maybe you'll be open-minded to a slightly different response. And instead of opening what in California our mental hospitals are called the state hospitals, instead of reopening state hospitals, which in a number of cases either no longer exist or in serious disuse, it's not so much that the state hospitals are in disrepair. It's that, as Mayor Agnos sort of intimated, the way that we respond to homelessness is always evolving and changing as we learn more about what works and doesn't work. It is not static. And one of the things we've learned is that 100 or 200 or 300 people in one place is not necessarily conducive to healing and recuperating and getting back on one's feet. What we have found, and the research is found nationwide, and in fact Project Roomkey, which we can talk about later, works much better, are smaller settings and non-congregate settings where people can have a little bit of privacy and a little space to work on themselves, and being community-based, as opposed to Napa State Hospital, which is one of the big ones, which is not near necessarily the communities that people are trying to re-enter as they heal. So that's a very long way of saying we are spending in this budget that the governor just signed a couple months ago, $3 billion to create 22,000 of those beds, exactly of those beds. And they will come in the form of what some people know as board and care homes, which are smaller, maybe 4, 5, 6, 10, maybe 20 people, all the way up to clinics and more sort of hospital-feeling settings that are going to approximate those state hospitals. So the answer is that we agree that it is the only way out. If I'm allowed to say that, do I have to pay royalties to somebody? It's the only way. It's the only way out of this challenge that we face. Is opening up. We cannot do enough with our existing built capacity. We must add built capacity if we are serious about solving this challenge. The strategy that Governor Newsom has chosen to pursue is one of adaptive reuse. That's a wonky term we use for taking something that exists and turning it into something else. Adaptive reuse is really what we're thinking about doing, but in this case, deep clinical enhancement. We are not talking about apartment buildings where we shove people. We are talking about 24/7 care. We are talking about nurses and doctors. We are talking about medication-assisted treatment if that's necessary. We are talking about serious clinical support for people coming off the streets. So if we are successful, and God hopes we are, in a few years' time, we will have opened up 22,000 additional beds in California across the state for this precise purpose. That's just one part of a much larger homelessness agenda that I won't filibuster about. But I wanted to respond to Mayor Agnos because the answer is you're right. And we're deeply on our way. Now, final point, and I'll hand it back to you. We can't do any of this unless we have community leaders who are willing to say yes.
That's right.
It is far too easy in this state. And, you know, I was San Francisco oriented for 10 or 15 years, but now we travel around the state and we engage with communities around the state. It is so easy to find a reason to say no to one of these new community clinics that I've just described. It's so easy to say, well, I support doing something about homelessness, but I just think this particular corner isn't the right place to do that. There is always a reason. There is always a reason to say no. And unless we work together and push through that and find a reason to say yes, we're never going to get on top of this. So we can put as much money as we want into this. I can send the governor around the state to demagogue this issue at community forums up and down, and it's not going to make a lick of difference unless we have folks like Mayor Agnos and like the people in this room getting into those community meetings, getting into those city council meetings. I won't even start on the Board of Supervisors here, that's a different situation, but getting into those community meetings around the state and saying, we must say yes. Otherwise, our money is not going to be well spent. Yeah, this manifests at the local level, and so we're going to need those partnerships locally if we want to get on top of this challenge.
Thank you so much. Well done. Well said. It's evident that we're not going to be able to solve this crisis in any one locality. It's going to take everybody working together, right? And All Home California is attacking that from that strategy, from that plan. And I'd like to ask Gail Gilman to discuss some of the innovative regional strategies that are being pursued by your organization to serve this Bay Area. Could you please share a bit?
Oh, thank you so much. And first of all, I wanted to thank Salvation Army for having All Home be here today. Salvation Army is a partner in what I'm just going to discuss. And also, Jason in the governor's office. They've been with us day one, realizing that while it's actualized at the local level, we need to be all acting regionally, particularly in the Bay, LA metro area and other areas to really combat this. So I just wanted to thank both those partnerships before I answer that question. All Home California works in the 9 Bay Area counties to combat homelessness and to assist people who are extremely low income with housing security and economic mobility. And just before I answer the question, just to level set what we're talking about, this is pre-pandemic. In the Bay, there were 800,000 people living on under $37,000 a year, and only 7% of them were experiencing homelessness. So the others, individuals living in extreme poverty are living in the Bay. 41% of them were employed. Another 37% were seniors living on Social Security, to give you a snapshot. So All Home is very concerned about individuals now experiencing homelessness, but we're also concerned about the crescendo that we think is going to happen of new folks entering homelessness around the Bay. All Home launched a regional impact council. Mayor Breed was one of the 3 big city mayors to sit on that, along with many other people. And San Francisco, along with San Mateo County, Contra Costa, Napa, and Santa Clara, and we'll get the Solano and Marin are coming along, and Sonoma, have pledged to reduce unsheltered homelessness by 75% by the end of 2024. And we're doing this with a regional approach, all sort of swimming together, acting together. And the work of the governor's office and the unprecedented resources that he has committed to homelessness over a 2-year budget cycle to give certainty to cities and counties of what they'll receive is the game changer. So we are calling for what's called interim housing, which is a fancy, fancy word for what we used to call transitional housing and non-congregate shelter. And we're looking to do that across the Bay in every jurisdiction, mostly by using modular pop-up construction, tiny homes, to give individuals that respite off the streets that Jason spoke about. If during the pandemic, the region could bring in close to 6,000 individuals who are either in congregate shelter or on the streets, we can act as a region and act with urgency to do it together. And it's key. San Francisco cannot do this alone. If San Mateo, Alameda, Marin, and others don't do it in lockstep, we're not going to really solve this crisis. I don't need a passport to go from San Mateo to San Francisco. And even during the shelter in home, I actually ventured out over the Golden Gate Bridge, and I had to go do something. And I was an essential worker. I brought my badge. I brought everything I needed to do, but I actually thought there'd be like military people at the Golden Gate Bridge checking all that. So my point is, people travel. People have things they need to do, and we need to combat this together. And I will say, I just want to dovetail on one thing Jason said that I really want to elevate is, it needs to be actualized at the local level. All Home is here to help with that. But I will just say, I've been in this space for almost 30 years. I used to run Community Housing Partnership, which was one of the largest providers of supportive housing in this city. I was here when this building was being built. And remember the struggle Salvation Army went in to site this building. I really want to help the homeless, but not on my street corner. We are hearing from everyone in the 9 Bay Area counties, it is at a fever pitch. It is the actual worst that it has ever been. Santa Clara just rejected a home key application. They voted it down at for family housing. For homeless family, their city council voted it down because they want to help the homeless, but not here. So I really want to urge all of you and Salvation Army to activate your networks, to speak up, to join a collective. All Home might be launching a collective advocacy campaign across the Bay, because we need folks like you to really say that we want our brothers and sisters who are experiencing homelessness to be indoors and be in our community. Close to 75% of individuals who are on our streets were housed in the communities they were living before they became homeless. Wow. And they don't want to move. Folks don't want to go to the Napa State Hospital if their whole community is in Redwood City. So we really need to do this collectively and together.
Thank you, Gail. And we're having such a great time in this panel discussion. I'm realizing the time is marching along. Shanell, we've got a few minutes left. Would you mind sharing with us about Prop C and what, the taxpayers, they decided, hey, this is a big issue and we're ready to go forward with this. Can you share about where we're going with this Prop C money?
Yes, and thank you. I'm so honored to be here and amongst this illustrious panel, and thank you to Theo for that wonderful introduction. I am a San Francisco native, and I will say that it is the worst that I've ever seen in this community. In addition to serving on the Prop C as the chair of the Prop C committee, I also am the president of the Board of Trustees at City College of San Francisco. So for me, this is about intersections, right? I mean, we talk about education, we talk about social services, we talk about the mental health piece of this, and what is so great about Prop C is that we have an unprecedented opportunity with the amount of resources that we are now about to inject into the San Francisco community. $300 million a year. When we saw those headlines from our mayor, Mayor Breed, saying $1 billion with a B, dollars that we are going to be injecting into our community, this is unprecedented. So for us, it's about accountability, right? Like the board that I serve on, it's an amazing board. We have the resources there, but how do we put measures in place to really make sure that we're having an impact? That is the issue at hand. We want to make sure that we're not just investing in one intervention, we're investing in multiple interventions to meet people where they're at. Because as we know, there's a myriad of folks who end up homeless on our streets. I was just seeing the Chronicle spotlight in Oakland, and they're looking in Oakland at the homelessness, following 4 individuals who are homeless on the streets in Oakland. And you look at their stories, and they're all so very different, right? And so it's not a cookie cutter size model, but one thing that we're committed to with the Prop C committee is that we're committed to centering lived experience, really talking to folks who are homeless, who've been formerly homeless, and having them guide the investments we make. We're also centering racial equity, because the face of homelessness in San Francisco is Black men primarily, so we have to be real about that. How do we really lift up cultural responsiveness and making sure that we're meeting our Black community where they're at? And we really need to look at how do we bring folks together. We have all these different folks in silos, I would say in silos, and sometimes not working together as best that we should when it comes to these myriad of issues. So how do we sort of be a convener and bringing together these myriad of pieces of the problem? And so I would just say that we have an unprecedented opportunity here. We have some amazing experts, and it's amazing that we have all the sort of past mayors represented. I know Mayor Willie Brown couldn't be here, but this is a problem that's been going on for far too long. But now that we have the resources to make the difference, we have no excuse, and we have to really work with Salvation Army. We have to work with all of our community-based partners, bring folks to the table and figure out what are the interventions that are going to work best for our communities. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much. Folks, we've heard some great ideas, some great things, and I agree with everything everybody has said. This is some good stuff. If we can all agree, for the four people up on stage, and we can spread that agreement across, then we're going to start getting some things done, won't we? That's what we need to do. We need to work with one another. We need the government working with the private sector, private citizens out there loving their communities. That's what the Salvation Army does. And with this large infusion of money that's coming, the way we can look at it is like a shot of adrenaline. It's short-term strength to get us through a crisis, and we are in a crisis. And so thank you so very much for being a part of this panel. I do want to point out while we're up here, we have some gentlemen from our Way Out program, our new extension of our Harbor Light program, and we're doing the very thing that Mayor Agnos was talking about, wraparound services. These gentlemen, the statistics are showing that they're going to have a 90% success rate after a year of completion. Gentlemen, could you please rise so we can just... The Salvation Army is committed to continue to serve in this community, and homelessness is a big issue, and one of the big ways of working to prevent homelessness is stopping it from happening in the first place. And so we're going to watch a video of some of the great things that are going on in this community, and I'd invite you folks to come on down.